Imagine waking in a house where every whisper carries the weight of unspeakable sin, where the walls themselves bleed with the guilt of stolen lives. In 1847 Mississippi, a slave named Nora was forced into a nightmare that twisted blood, betrayal, and biblical justice into a curse that no grave could contain. What if the children you raised were your own, ripped from your womb by the devil's own hand? Stay, and feel the chill of divine retribution unfolding. In the shadowed heart of antebellum Mississippi, where the Mississippi River coiled like a serpent through the fertile delta lands, silence wasn't merely the absence of sound, it was a living entity, a spectral presence woven into the very fabric of existence. It slithered through the creaking floorboards of plantation homes, lingered in the humid air thick with the scent of blooming magnolias and damp earth, and pressed upon the souls of those ensnared in its grasp. This silence was born not of peace, but of secrets so profane they mocked the heavens, echoing the biblical curse of Cain, a mark upon the guilty, invisible yet indelible, ensuring that no deed of darkness could escape the light of judgment. It was the silence of a plantation called Grayfield, where the cotton fields stretched like white shrouds under a merciless sun, and where one man's hubris invited divine wrath to walk among the living. Picture the scene: dawn breaks over Adams County, 12 miles southeast of Natchez, in the year 1847. The sky is a bruised gray, undecided between mercy and storm, much like the soul of Edmund Hale, the master of Grayfield. The air hums with the low buzz of cicadas, their relentless chorus a harbinger of the day's toil. Slaves move like ghosts through the mist-shrouded fields, their bent backs silhouetted against the horizon, hands raw and calloused from plucking the thorny bulls that fueled an empire built on blood. The main house looms atop a gentle rise, a two-story edifice of whitewashed brick and towering columns, its wide veranda casting long shadows that seem to reach out, grasping at the quarters below. Inside, candlelight flickers through lace-curtained windows, illuminating portraits of stern ancestors whose painted eyes judge the living with unyielding severity. The wood floors, polished to a sheen by unseen hands, creak underfoot like the groans of the damned. This is no mere home. It's a stage for a tragedy scripted in the ink of sin, where every room holds a confession waiting to be unearthed. Edmund Hale was a man forged in the fires of calculated ambition, a figure who embodied the cold arithmetic of the Old South's moral decay. Arriving in 1841 at the age of 26, he carried with him not dreams of grandeur, but a ledger of opportunities seized from the misfortunes of others. His frame was lean and wiry, clad in tailored coats of fine wool that hung on him like a shroud, his face etched with lines that spoke of sleepless nights plotting moves in a game where human lives were pawns. Neighbors whispered of his deliberate gaze, eyes like polished steel, always assessing, never revealing. He spoke in measured tones, each word a stone dropped into a still pond, rippling outward with intent. Not the bombastic cruelty of overseers who wielded whips like extensions of their rage, but a subtler venom, the indifference of a chessmaster sacrificing a piece for victory. In him burned the spirit of Ahab, pursuing wealth not for joy, but as a defiance against fate, blind to the divine harpoon that awaited. He purchased Grayfield from the ruins of the Oaks family estate, 412 acres of alluvial soil rich as Eden's garden, yet tainted by generations of exploitation. The transaction was a bargain struck in courtrooms where justice bent to the weight of gold. Edmund renamed it Grayfield, not for despair, but for ambiguity, a limbo where right and wrong blurred like fog over the creeks that bordered the land. He built the house methodically, workers hammering nails under the relentless sun, the rhythmic thud echoing like a heartbeat in the womb of creation. The structure rose with 4 Ionic columns, a facade of prosperity masking the hollow core within. Inside, rooms were furnished sparingly, mahogany tables scarred from use, crystal decanters catching the light like trapped fireflies, and a grand staircase spiraling upward, its banister worn smooth by hands both free and bound. By 1843, Grayfield pulsed with the forced labor of 31 souls. Acquired at Natchez's infamous slave markets. The auctions were carnivals of horror, platforms stained with sweat and tears, bidders in top hats shouting numbers as if trading livestock. Edmund approached them with a predator's patience, scanning listings for assets that fit his vision. Among them was Nora, 22 years old, torn from a Virginia tobacco plantation amid bankruptcy's wreckage. The auctioneer's ledger described her clinically: healthy, sound constitution, domestic skills, literate. But ledgers lie by omission. They didn't capture her essence, a woman with a memory sharp as a blade, eyes dark and knowing, absorbing the world like a sponge in shadowed corners. Her skin was the warm hue of polished walnut, her movements graceful yet guarded, born of survival in a world where vulnerability invited destruction. She had learned to read in secret, eavesdropping on lessons meant for white children, her mind a sanctuary amid the storm. Edmund paid a premium for her, sensing utility in her quiet intelligence. Assigned to the main house, she navigated its labyrinth with the wariness of Daniel in the lion's den. The air inside was heavy with scents, beeswax from polished furniture, lavender from sachets warding off moths, and the faint, acrid tang of pipe smoke from Edmund's study. Nora's days blurred into routines, dusting shelves lined with leather-bound tomes on agriculture and law, preparing meals where steam rose like prayers from iron pots, and observing the hails with a perceptiveness that bordered on prophetic. In the autumn of 1843, Edmund wed Clara Weston, a union brokered in drawing rooms where alliances trumped affection. Clara was slight, with porcelain skin and eyes like shadowed pools, her demeanor a veil over inner fortitude. Raised in genteel poverty, she read rooms like scripture, anticipating tempests before they broke. Their marriage was a contract. He gained social legitimacy, her family financial reprieve. No passionate embraces under moonlit oaks, but a pragmatic bond, sealed with vows in a chapel where stained glass depicted saints gazing down in silent reproach. Clara arrived at Greyfield amid fanfare, a carriage crunching gravel, servants lined like sentinels. She met Nora in the foyer, light filtering through leaded windows casting ethereal patterns on the floor. "You're Nora," Clara stated, her voice a soft command. In that gaze lingered unspoken recognition, a spark of kinship amid hierarchy's chasm. Clara managed the household with efficiency, her instructions clear as bells tolling across the fields. She wasn't affectionate, but fair, a rarity in a system where caprice ruled. Nora became her attendant, aiding with accounts in the study where quills scratched parchment under lamplight's glow. Numbers danced like fireflies, revealing the plantation's grim economy, bales of cotton equaling soul's worth. The years 1844 to 1845 brought sorrow's shadow. Clara's first pregnancy ended in miscarriage at 4 months, a quiet agony in the upstairs bedroom, sheets stained with loss, the air thick with herbal poultices from Dr. Vickers. The second, at 6 months, deepened the wound. Edmund received news stoically, his face a mask, but Clara hardened, her spirit retreating like a tide before a storm. Biblical echoes haunted her, the barrenness of Sarah, the grief of Rachel, questioning if this was punishment for sins unspoken. Nora, ever watchful, noted the change, the way Clara's hands trembled over teacups, her eyes distant as if peering into an abyss. Spring 1847 ushered Clara's third conception, fragile as spun glass. The household tiptoed, whispers hushed, as if noise might shatter the miracle. Edmund, uncharacteristically solicitous, curtailed outings, summoned Vickers for checkups. His study, with its maps pinned like conquests and ledgers stacked like altars, became a command center. Nora attended Clara exclusively, brewing teas of chamomile and ginger, her presence a silent anchor. But beneath this veneer lurked a darkness that would invoke the wrath of a jealous god. In the winter of 1846, Edmund's gaze turned predatory toward Nora. No records capture the violation's details, only fragments, ledger shifts in her duties, Vickers' cryptic letter in June 1847 hinting at delicate matters. Testimonies from Hattie and Lou, enslaved women of Greyfield, painted the horror. Edmund's nocturnal visits to Nora's cramped room off the kitchen, door creaking like a tomb's hinge, the air heavy with forbidden tension. Nora confided in whispers, her voice breaking like waves on rocks, describing submission as survival, a sin forced upon her echoing the biblical rape of Tamar, guilt not hers, yet borne like a cross. Nora conceived twins amid this abomination, her body a battlefield where innocence clashed with iniquity. Clara birthed Josephine in early October 1847, a arduous labor under flickering candles, cries piercing the night like accusations. Relief washed over Greyfield, Edmund's rare smile a crack in his facade. But Clara weakened, her frame frail, unable to nurse, relying on a wet nurse's milk. 3 weeks later, Nora labored in secrecy, Hattie her sole companion in the dim quarters. The boy emerged first, slick and wailing, then the girl, tiny and fierce. But dawn brought theft. Edmund stole the boy, Henry, spiriting him to the main house as his own. Hattie's testimony chilled, Nora's anguished query, the silence that followed heavier than chains. The plantation buzzed with the lie Clara had borne twins, separated by weeks, documented by Vickers' complicit hand. Biblical irony abounded, like Pharaoh claiming Moses, Edmund usurped bloodlines, inviting plagues upon his house. Clara lived 15 months more, dying of fever in January 1849. Her bond with the children was skewed, Josephine cradled with tenderness, Henry at arm's length, as if her soul sensed the deception. Perhaps she glimpsed the truth in their features, Josephine's deep-water eyes mirroring Clara's, Henry's laugh echoing Nora's spirit. Her final days were a vigil, feverish whispers in sweat-dampened sheets, the room smelling of laudanum and impending judgment. Edmund mourned perfunctorily, black armband a token, then summoned Nora. In his study, firelight dancing on walls like infernal shadows, he commanded her to raise his children. No witnesses to her response, perhaps defiance flickered, suppressed like embers. She ascended to the upper floor, nursery adjacent, its walls papered in faded florals, cribs carved with innocent motifs now tainted. Nora's days became a liturgy of care, dawn feedings with warm milk steaming in porcelain bowls, baths in copper tubs where water rippled like revelations, walks on the veranda where breeze carried cotton's fluff like wandering souls. She sang lullabies, haunting melodies from African roots blended with hymns, evoking psalms of lament. Josephine, quiet and observant, clung to her. Henry, boisterous, laughed with abandon. In them, Nora saw her fractured self, blood denied, yet nurtured. Her own daughter, Pearl, remained in the quarters, a ghost child raised by Hattie and Lou evenings. Nora stole moments, holding Pearl under starlit skies, her tiny hands grasping like pleas for justice. Pearl's exclusion from the house was unspoken law, a barrier symbolizing the chasm of sin. Nora watched her grow from afar, heart aching like the pierced side of Christ, pondering redemption's price. The decade from 1849 onward saw Grayfield prosper outwardly, bountiful harvests, Edmund's wealth swelling like a tumor. But spiritually, rot festered. Sundays brought the minister, sermons on providence ringing hollow amid the pews, where slaves sat segregated, their silent prayers invoking Elijah's fire upon the unjust. Edmund's indifference grew, his soul a wasteland, blind to the gathering storm of abolition's winds. Nora's role deepened, teaching letters by candlelight, her voice a soothing cadence, instilling morals laced with subversion, tales of Moses' liberation whispered like prophecies. The children absorbed her essence, unaware of the blood tie binding them. Henry chased fireflies in twilight fields, their glow mimicking fleeting hope. Josephine pondered stars, questioning existence's cruelty. Yet, undertones of divine retribution simmered. Strange occurrences plagued Grayfield, whispers in empty halls, shadows twisting unnaturally, fevers striking overseers like biblical plagues. Nora sensed it, a haunting legacy, the sins of the father visiting the children, as foretold in Exodus. Her empathy for the twins warred with dread, curiosity about Pearl fueling reflection on justice's scales. In this cinematic tapestry, visuals assault the senses, close-ups of Nora's calloused hands cradling infants, sweat beading on brows under noon sun, the metallic tang of blood from pricked fingers on cotton thorns. Sounds amplify immersion, whip cracks distant as thunder, lullabies fading into night, the rustle of hidden letters foretelling revelation. The truth, buried like a seed in fertile soil, awaited harvest. In 1866, post-war reckonings unearthed documents, ledgers, letters, testimonies in a courthouse where light pierced dusty air like heavenly swords. Federal clerk Douglas Peel described the unveiling, a collapse of illusions, hands trembling over papers yellowed as old sins. Witnesses fell silent, the room thick with spiritual chill, as if angels wept. This part of the saga sets the foundation, a prelude to reckoning where guilt's shadow lengthens, sin's debt compounds, and redemption's path twists through thorns. Nora's story isn't mere history, it's a parable of divine justice, where the oppressed rise, the mighty fall, and silence shatters under truth's weight. The plantation's legacy haunts, a reminder that no secret escapes the eye of providence, echoing through generations like an eternal amen. In the veiled annals of Grayfield Plantation, where the veil between earthly toil and eternal judgment grew perilously thin, the years from 1849 to the eve of the Civil War unfolded like a biblical scroll, revealing layers of deception that mirrored the serpentine deceptions of Eden. This was no mere passage of time, it was a slow fermentation of secrets, where silence fermented into something potent and poisonous, seeping into the soil like the blood of Abel crying out for vengeance. The arid Grayfield carried a perpetual hush, broken only by the rhythmic swish of scythes in the fields, the distant lowing of cattle in mist-laden pastures, and the occasional crack of thunder that seemed to echo divine disapproval from the heavens. Cotton bowls burst open under the sun's unrelenting gaze, their white fluff drifting like lost souls across the delta, while the main house stood sentinel, its columns weathered by rain and regret, windows like watchful eyes reflecting the moral decay within. Edmund Hale, the architect of this shadowed domain, navigated these years with the mechanical precision of a man who viewed life as a ledger to be balanced, heedless of the spiritual debts accruing in the margins. His days were a ritual of oversight, mornings in the study, poring over maps yellowed at the edges, ink-stained fingers tracing boundaries that enclosed not just land, but lives. The scent of pipe tobacco clung to his clothes, mingling with the earthy aroma of turned soil wafting through open windows. He expanded Greyfield modestly, acquiring adjacent parcels in 1852, their deeds crisp and legal, yet stained by the invisible ink of exploitation. Socially, he played the part of the prosperous planter, attending services at the clapboard church in Natchez, where sermons on Providence rang hollow against the clink of collection plates filled by slave-earned wealth, hosting dinners where crystal glasses chimed like false merriment, candle flames dancing on silverware polished by unseen hands. Neighbors saw him as unremarkable, a man of middle stature, his hair graying at the temples like frost on autumn leaves, his voice steady but devoid of warmth. Yet, in his composure lurked the spirit of Pharaoh, hardening his heart against the plagues brewing on the horizon, blind to the Mosaic liberation that history would soon demand. The children, Henry and Josephine, blossomed in this tainted garden, their growth a testament to Nora's unspoken nurture, infused with a perceptiveness that echoed the watchful eyes of prophets in exile. By the mid-1850s, they were described in letters and diaries as uncanny, self-possessed beyond their years, as if their souls carried the weight of ancient wisdom. The tutor, Gaston Pearl, a wiry Frenchman with spectacles perched on a beak-like nose, arrived from New Orleans in 1854, his valise stuffed with leather-bound classics. In his correspondence, he marveled at their acuity, lessons in the sun-dappled parlor, where sunlight filtered through lace curtains like fragmented revelations, revealing pupils who dissected Latin texts with surgical insight. Henry, boisterous and inquisitive, peppered him with queries about the mechanics of steam engines chugging along the riverbanks, or the philosophies debated in distant salons, his laughter echoing through halls like a brief respite from the plantation's gloom. Josephine, more reserved, absorbed knowledge silently, her dark eyes scanning pages as if seeking hidden scriptures, her fingers tracing words with a delicacy that belied inner turmoil. This inheritance of observation stemmed from Nora, their true mother, whose presence wove through their lives like an invisible thread of fate. She was the constant, mornings in the nursery, now a schoolroom with chalkboards smeared by eager hands, where she prepared breakfasts of grits steaming in earthen bowls, the aroma of bacon fat sizzling on cast-iron skillets filling the air. Afternoons found her mending linens in the sewing room, needles pricking fabric with rhythmic precision, while teaching Josephine the arts of the household, folding pie crusts with crimped edges that held secrets as tightly as lips sealed by fear. Nora's voice, soft and melodic, carried hymns that blended African rhythms with biblical verses, evoking the lamentations of Jeremiah, songs that lingered in the children's minds like spiritual anchors. Josephine, in particular, gravitated to her, calling Nora with an intimacy that transcended servitude, a tone laden with unspoken longing, as if her soul recognized the maternal bond denied by man's law but affirmed by God's design. It was in this crucible that Josephine first encountered Pearl in 1853, an encounter charged with the electricity of divine coincidence, foreshadowing the unraveling of Greyfield's cursed tapestry. 6 years old, Josephine slipped from the main house like a shadow evading light, her small feet padding silently over creaking boards she had memorized. The quarters lay beyond the manicured lawns, a cluster of rough-hewn cabins with thatched roofs sagging under vines, smoke curling from chimneys like prayers ascending to an indifferent sky. The air there was thicker, laced with the tang of wood smoke and stewing greens, sounds of laughter muffled by the ever-present hum of labor. Pearl, compact and vibrant, sat in the yard of Hattie and Lou's cabin, her hands sorting beans with deft motions, her eyes mirrors of Nora's sharp as flint. Raised by the two elder women, who tended her with the fierce protectiveness of lionesses guarding a cub, Pearl embodied resilience, her skin glowing like burnished copper under the sun, her stillness a mask for the storm within. Josephine halted, transfixed, as Nora bandaged Pearl's wounded hand, cloth wrapping flesh with tender care, the scene illuminated by slanting afternoon light that cast golden halos around them. "Who is she?" Josephine's voice pierced the quiet, innocent yet probing, like Eve questioning the fruit. Nora's face flickered, a momentary crack in her armor, grief and guarded love flashing like lightning. "Pearl," she replied, her tone measured, as if weighing each word against the scales of justice. The girl's gazes locked, Pearl's unflinching, Josephine's curious, a silent communion that hinted at sororal bonds forged in the womb but severed by sin. That evening, under the canopy of a four-poster bed draped in mosquito netting, Josephine whispered to Henry, her words tumbling like pebbles into a well, sparking his relentless questions, echoes of the Socratic pursuit that would later define him. As the 1850s progressed, the South's golden facade cracked under mounting tensions, a decade of opulence shadowed by the gathering storm of abolition, much like the prophets warning Israel of impending exile. Cotton prices soared, bales stacked high in warehouses along the Mississippi, their white purity a mocking contrast to the blood-soaked hands that harvested them. Edmund, ever the pragmatist, fortified Grayfield, diversifying crops with cornfields waving golden tassels, stockpiling supplies in barns creaking with abundance, reducing reliance on volatile markets. Political fervor simmered in Natchez taverns, where men in broadcloth suits debated secession over whiskey glasses fogged by breath, the air thick with cigar smoke and rhetoric. Edmund attended, his face impassive, assessing risks like a gambler eyeing cards, foreseeing the cataclysm but powerless to avert it. In 1855, he dispatched Henry to Nashville's Academy, a bastion of Southern gentility with ivy-clad halls and lectures on rhetoric and agronomy. 8-year-old Henry boarded the stagecoach under a leaden sky, his trunk heavy with books and unspoken fears. The night prior, in the kitchen where embers glowed. Like watchful eyes, he confronted Nora. "Will you remember what I look like?" Her assurance, "I have not forgotten a single face in my life," hung in the air like a benediction, her eyes betraying depths of maternal sorrow compressed into stoicism. With Henry absent, Grayfield's atmosphere thickened, Edmund's presence a looming shadow, his footsteps echoing on polished floors like judgments rendered. Josephine matured in this vacuum, her composure a shield over turbulent emotions, evoking the biblical Job's silent suffering amid trials. By 12, she listened to adult conversations with detached intensity, her mind wandering to unspoken realms, frustrating Edmund's attempts to decipher her. Her bond with Nora deepened, evenings in lamplit rooms, mending by firelight that cast flickering shadows on walls adorned with faded tapestries. Questions flowed about Virginia's rolling hills, tobacco-scented breezes, Nora's mother whose memory lingered like a ghost. Nora answered with precision, her words parcels of truth doled out sparingly, planting seeds of doubt in Josephine's fertile mind. By 1858, at 11, Josephine ventured deliberately to the quarters, Edmund away in Natchez. Pearl, sorting beans in the dust, met her with equanimity. "I know who you are," Pearl stated, her voice steady. Their exchange crackled with recognition. "Nora takes care of you too." Josephine's deduction pierced the veil, Pearl's response a challenge. They sat in the yard, beans clicking like rosary beads, the sun dipping low, painting the scene in hues of redemption's promise. This meeting marked a turning point, the invisible wall crumbling like Jericho's under divine command. Henry returned in 1859, transformed at 18, taller, his features sharpened by intellect, clad in tailored coats that bespoke maturity. Nashville had exposed him to broader horizons, debates on liberty. Whispers of reform igniting questions that smoldered like embers. He probed Grayfield's underbelly, conversing with Overseer Doss in the barn's hay-scented gloom, Ruth in the quarter's dim light, and finally Nora. Their talks, fragmentary in records, unfolded like confessions, autumn evenings on the veranda, cicadas chorusing as background to revelations. Henry's journal noted Pearl's face haunting him, a familiarity that tugged at buried truths. He discerned Nora's gaze, compressed love, like manna hidden in the wilderness, prompting a spiritual awakening, questioning the moral rot of his inheritance. The 1860 election ignited the powder keg, Lincoln's victory a thunderclap, secession rippling through states like dominoes toppling. Edmund, in Jackson's halls amid fervent crowds, signed on to the inevitable, his letter decrying the folly yet resigning to it. War descended, Henry enlisted in 1862, uniform crisp, rifle heavy, marching into fields where cannon smoke obscured the sun like sin-veiling grace. At Grayfield, war eroded boundaries, fields fallow, supplies scarce, a household a skeleton crew. Josephine and Pearl's connection solidified, Pearl entering the kitchen boldly, Nora acquiescing. They shared moments, shelling peas by hearthlight, whispers of dreams amid ration meals. Nora, now in her 40s, embodied endurance, a pillar like Ruth in foreign lands, bearing 19 years of silenced agony, raising children in shadows, her soul a repository of divine patience awaiting justice. This era pulsed with spiritual chill, omens abounded, crops blighted as if by locusts, dreams of judgment plaguing sleep. The twin story, veiled in deception, mirrored biblical tales of stolen birthrights, Esau and Jacob inverted, foreshadowing a reckoning where truth would emerge like Lazarus from the tomb, demanding atonement for sins that scarred generations. The war years at Greyfield Plantation were a crucible of erosion, where the grand edifice of Edmund Hale's dominion cracked under the weight of Confederate defeat, Union advances, and the slow, inexorable unraveling of the moral order that had sustained it. The Mississippi River, swollen with spring rains in 1863, carried the distant rumble of cannon fire like prophetic warnings from on high, echoing the biblical plagues visited upon Pharaoh's hardened heart. Fields once white with cotton now lay fallow in patches, weeds encroaching like judgment creeping upon the unjust, while the main house's columns, streaked with rain and neglect, stood as silent witnesses to a legacy poisoned by hidden sin. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth, wood smoke from meager fires in the quarters, and the faint metallic tang of gunpowder drifting on southern winds, a reminder that earthly empires crumble when built on the backs of the oppressed. Nora, now in her early 40s, bore the invisible burdens of 2 decades with a quiet fortitude that evoked the steadfastness of Job amid unrelenting trials. She had watched her children, Henry, Josephine, and Pearl, grow from afar and from within, her maternal gaze a silent prayer offered in the shadows. Josephine had blossomed into a young woman of piercing insight, her sharp eyes catching flickers of truth others missed, the way she sorted beans with Pearl in Hattie's yard one golden afternoon in 1858, defying the invisible hierarchies as if the plantation's chains were mere illusions she could step beyond. Pearl, raised in the quarter's rough embrace by Hattie and Lou, had developed an iron resolve, not brittle, but tempered like steel and fire, her patience a weapon forged in deprivation, her clear eyes inheriting Nora's unerring memory for faces, sequences, and unspoken pains. Henry, away at war, carried the same perceptive weight, his questions evolving from boyish curiosity to something deeper, probing the foundations of his existence like a man seeking the roots of a poison tree. Nora transmitted to them what her own mother had given her, the gift of seeing clearly, of reading rooms before entering them, of surviving through vigilant observation rather than overt rebellion. She could not speak the forbidden words, "I am your mother," for such a declaration would have invited immediate catastrophe in a world where truth was a luxury the enslaved could ill afford. Instead, she modeled endurance, her every careful gesture a lesson in spiritual resilience, echoing the quiet faithfulness of Mary at the foot of the cross. She waited, as the faithful wait upon the Lord, trusting that divine timing would bring revelation when human cruelty had run its course. In the spring of 1863, as Union forces pressed up the Mississippi corridor, Edmund Hale revealed the calculating cowardice beneath his composed facade. He sequestered his most vital documents, ledgers detailing human transactions, land deeds stained with blood money, correspondence with lawyers and the complicit Dr. Ambrose Vickers, moving them under cover of night to the overseer's cabin on the property's remote edge. The cabin, a squat structure of weathered pine half hidden by overgrown brush, smelled of mildew and old tobacco, its single window latched loosely against intruders. Edmund worked alone over 2 March days, sweat beading on his brow under lantern light, the metallic clink of keys and the rustle of papers the only sounds in the oppressive quiet. He confided in no one, locking the door with a heavy padlock and pocketing the key, as if mere metal could contain the sins documented within. Pearl discovered the key in August, during Edmund's 9-day fever. At 50, his body rebelled against years of strained war news, crop failures, the gnawing fear of loss, confining him to his four-poster bed. Draped in mosquito netting, the room thick with the scent of laudanum and fever sweat. His coat hung on a chair, the key ring slipped to the floorboards with a soft gingle. Nora, entering twice daily with trays of broth and fresh linens, retrieved it without hesitation, placing it within reach. But Pearl, lingering in the hallway's dim corridor, glimpsed the ring in her mother's hands, the distinctive shape, the count of keys etched in her memory like scripture. She waited 11 days, her patience a deliberate act of preparation, biblical in its restraint. On a September afternoon, with Edmund in Natchez, Pearl approached the cabin. The north window's faulty latch yielded easily. She had used it as a child refuge during storms, rain pattering on tin roofs while lightning illuminated hidden fears. Inside, dust motes danced in slanted light filtering through cracks, stacks of papers awaited like accusations. Pearl, literate through Nora's clandestine teachings, fragments of spelling by candlelight, words pieced together in stolen moments, scanned ledgers and deeds swiftly. Then the letters, 9 from Vickers, spanning 1847 to 1853, bound in twine she untied with trembling fingers. The words leaped out, dates aligning with births, medical notations veiled yet damning, references to the arrangement and the boy transferred. She read them all, heart pounding like war drums, then retied the knot precisely, climbed out, and returned to the quarters. Sitting on Hattie's step in the fading light, the September sun warm on her skin yet unable to thaw the chill within, she spoke only when Hattie appeared. "I think I need to talk to Nora." That evening, in Nora's cramped room adjacent to the kitchen, the same space where violation had occurred years before, its walls scarred by memory, the confrontation unfolded under a single lamp's wavering flame. The air smelled of wood smoke and lye soap. Outside, a banjo's low, mournful figure drifted from the quarters like a lamentation psalm. Pearl recounted the letter's contents methodically, her voice steady despite the storm within. Nora sat motionless on her cot's edge, lamplight carving shadows across her face, etching deeper the lines of endured suffering. "How long have you known?" Pearl asked. "Since the beginning," Nora replied, her words heavy as chains. "And Henry and Josephine?" "They do not know. Josephine suspects something, has for years." "What are we going to do?" "Nothing yet. The war changes things, but not safety." "Not yet." Pearl's anger surfaced, quiet and profound. "I'm angry." "I know," Nora said. "Not at you." She reached across the narrow space, taking Pearl's hand, calloused fingers entwining with calloused fingers, a gesture laden with all that could not be spoken openly. It was insufficient, yet sacred, a momentary communion echoing Christ's touch upon the afflicted. Henry returned in spring 1865, a ghost of the boy who left, 24, scarred by Shiloh's carnage, Vicksburg's siege, Atlanta's fall. His uniform tattered, eyes hollowed by defeat, he walked the road to Grayfield under April skies heavy with Reconstruction's uncertainty. Edmund met him on the gallery, a silent embrace masking the chasm between father and son. In the kitchen, Nora turned from the stove, her gaze compressing volumes of unspoken love and pain. Henry sat at the familiar table, body remembering childhood rituals while his soul wrestled with revelations. "Nora, I have things to ask." She nodded. "When there's time." Emancipation arrived formally, yet freedom's texture remained ragged, dependencies lingered like phantom limbs. Grayfield's inhabitants stayed, bound by familiarity and limited horizons in a hostile landscape. Edmund, at 60, faltered for the first time, his calculated world unmoored. In summer 1865, the Freedmen's Bureau opened in Natchez, a modest office in a repurposed building, smelling of ink and fresh paper, staffed by men like Patrick Corbin, a Vermonter with lawyer's precision and abolitionists' conviction. Pearl, 18 and literate, learned of it through Traveler Dawson. She went in September with Deacon, Hattie's son, traveling dusty roads under watchful eyes. Corbin listened, noting her measured words, enough to intrigue, not overwhelm. She returned 4 times over months, building testimony like a mosaic of truth. Hattie and Lou spoke in January 1866, their accounts raw and precise. Henry, after quiet conversations with Nora, testified in April, in Corbin's office, sunlight slanting through dusty windows, he declared, "I believe Nora is my mother, and Pearl's, and that Josephine's mother is the same. The documents support this." His voice steady, yet the cost etched in his features, the shattering of identity, the confrontation with paternal sin. June 1866 brought Edmund to the Natchez courthouse, a brick edifice where justice now wore federal colors. At 61, thinner, opaque as ever, he faced Corbin and officials across a scarred table. Shown Vickers' letters, he read without flinch. Corbin pressed, "Explain these." Edmund paused, then, Vickers was not always precise. Corbin laid bare the testimony, the record assembling like stones in a wall of reckoning. This confrontation marked the climax of buried iniquity surfacing, a divine unveiling where the oppressed bore witness against the oppressor. Grayfield's curse, long festering, now lay exposed, guilt's shadow lengthening toward judgment, redemption's path opening through truth's painful light. The plantation's haunting legacy persisted, a testament that no sin escapes Providence's gaze, no secret remains entombed forever. The Natchez courthouse in June 1866 stood as a stark monument to shifting powers, brick walls warmed by summer sun, yet chilled by the gravity of revelations unfolding within. Inside, the air carried the scent of old paper, ink, and the faint mustiness of river humidity seeping through cracked windows. Patrick Corbin, the Freedmen's Bureau agent from Vermont, sat behind a plain oak desk scarred by years of use, his pen poised like a sword of accountability. Edmund Hale, 61 and diminished by the war's toll, faced him across the table, his once imposing frame now gaunt, eyes still holding that impenetrable steel. The vicar's letters lay exposed between them, yellowed pages bound in twine, their ink faded but accusations sharp as ever. Corbin spoke with measured calm. "This is not a criminal proceeding, Mr. Hale. But it is a federal record. It will endure." He gestured to the documents. "These letters, the testimonies, they form a permanent archive. We ask if you wish to add your voice, or let the record stand as it is." Edmund stared at the papers he had guarded for 19 years, hidden in a remote cabin as if distance could nullify consequence. In that moment, the truth crystallized: a locked door secures nothing when the world turns. Secrets, like seeds planted in dark soil, eventually seek light. He requested a lawyer, his right, his final deferral. The session ended. No confession came. No apology. Edmund returned to Greyfield, retreating into the silence that had defined him. He died in January 1867, in the same upstairs bedroom where he had slept for 26 years. The room smelled of camphor and winter damp, firelight flickering on walls lined with portraits whose eyes now seemed accusatory. He passed quietly, as he had lived, controlled, unyielding. His will divided Greyfield between Henry and Josephine equally. Pearl received nothing. That omission etched itself into the record, a final act of denial that spoke louder than any words he might have uttered. In October 1866, Nora testified. She traveled alone to Natchez on a Tuesday morning eerily reminiscent of October 1847, the same slanted river light, the same heavy autumn scent of decaying leaves and distant smoke. At 45, she entered Corbin's office with the poise of someone who had rehearsed truth in silence for decades. She sat, hands folded in her lap, dark eyes steady. For 3 hours, she spoke without pause or embellishment. She recounted Virginia's tobacco fields, the metallic clang of auction blocks in Natchez, her arrival at Greyfield in 1843. She detailed the winter of 1846-47 with unflinching precision, the forced submissions, the pregnancy concealed, the October night of twin births in dim lamplight, Hattie's steady hands, the boy's removal before dawn. She named Pearl, her daughter left behind, Henry and Josephine, raised in the big house under false names. Her voice never wavered, each detail delivered like stones laid in a foundation of justice. Corbin wrote steadily, his hand cramping but relentless, absorbing the weight of her words. When she finished, he asked one question: in all those years, was there ever a moment you considered leaving Greyfield, Natchez, anywhere? Nora met his gaze. Where would I have gone? The question hung, not rhetorical but geographical, mapping the brutal realities of a woman enslaved, a mother tethered by invisible chains of love and survival. Corbin recorded it verbatim. In that simple reply lay the indictment of an entire system: freedom theoretical, escape impossible without resources, family, or legal personhood. The next day, Henry found her in Greyfield's kitchen. Dawn light slanted through windows, illuminating the familiar stove, the worn table scarred by generations of meals. Nora worked as always back to the door, hands moving with practiced rhythm. Henry entered quietly, sat. She turned. At 25, war-hardened yet softened by revelation, he searched for words that had eluded him for a year. "I know," he said. She held his gaze, the compressed love she had carried now visible. "I've known for a while. I should have. I'm sorry. For being away, for not seeing sooner. You were a child. Not always. For long enough." The kitchen stilled. Outside, September's golden light bathed cotton fields in their final harvest under Edmund's name. "You raised us," Henry said. "Every day. Knowing." "Yes. What do you need?" The question pierced her, first time in 23 years anyone had asked with full intent. "I need Pearl recognized. Her share in the record. Written down." "It will be," he promised. "I'll make sure." Josephine had always known, pieced together from childhood glimpses, Pearl's bandaged hand in 1853, Nora's fleeting expressions, the resonance of shared features. She waited, patient as prophecy, for confirmation. Henry brought it that fall, in the east-facing sitting room where creek light danced on walls. He told her everything. She listened, then, I know. I've known for a while. I waited for someone to say it. No one would. Not while he lived. They sat in silence, the creek flowing as it always had, a steady, indifferent witness. Pearl is our sister, Josephine said. Yes. She's known longest. She let us find our own way. Deliberate, Henry agreed. Pearl's recognition came slowly, arduously, through Freedmen's bureau files, Henry's legal persistence in Natchez courts, Vickers' letters archived federally. Reconstruction Mississippi resisted such claims. Evidence from formerly enslaved women and a dead doctor's pen carried little weight in hostile venues. Yet the record endured. Henry, inheriting Nora's precision, pressed forward relentlessly. Corbin departed in 1868 as the bureau waned. Back in Vermont, he resumed law, carrying case files and memories. In a letter to his brother, later preserved, he wrote of Nora, "She spoke with exactness that tested my distance. No drama, no anguish, just facts in sequence, unadorned. That is courage of a kind I have not seen before or since." He kept her testimony until death in 1903. His daughter donated the papers to the Vermont Historical Society in 1908. Nora stayed at Grayfield, not from lack of choice, but because it was her world, complicated yet hers. She and Pearl lived in Hattie's old quarters house, Hattie gone in 1864, Lou in 1866. Pearl claimed it through care, not title. Josephine visited often from Natchez, where she married Charles Delaney in 1869, a steady hardware merchant who knew the full history, respecting her need for truth over warmth. Henry left in 1868 for St. Louis, studying law to redirect systems toward justice. Before departing, he sat once more in the kitchen. "I'll write." Nora nodded. "You're already doing it." He left on a September Thursday, mirroring his childhood farewell. She watched from the window until he vanished, then returned to the stove. By 1871, Grayfield had shrunk. Sharecropping replaced outright ownership, a flawed evolution, neither full freedom nor old bondage. Nora, 50, Pearl, 23. Josephine arrived one April Saturday, air thick with spring's humid green promise. She found them in the yard turning soil, planting roses side by side in companionable quiet, silence itself a language honed over years. Josephine paused at the yard's edge, watching. In the April light, she saw Nora and Pearl's shared postures, the angle of heads, the quiet between them, mother and daughter, unmasked. Nora looked up. For the first time, without witnesses save Pearl, she let her gaze hold what it had always held, full, uncompressed maternal love. Josephine crossed the yard, set down her burdens, stood before Nora. "I know who you are to me." Nora stilled. "I know who you are to me," Josephine repeated. "I'm sorry it took so long to say." Pearl watched, hands at sides, eyes steady. Nora looked between them, her daughters, blood and bond, standing in turned earth under spring sun. She thought of 23 years of enforced silence, the particular hush that pressed on chests and seeped into walls. She thought of cost, of endurance, of love stronger than denial. In that yard, truth stood revealed, not sealed in cabins, not buried in ledgers, but alive in three women reclaiming what sin had fractured. Some things find the window. Some things outlast locks. The Grayfield record survives in national archives, testimonies, letters, a chronicle of stolen bloodlines and reclaimed kinship. It echoes hundreds of such stories across the South, hidden truths surfacing post-war, families pieced together amid ruins. If this tale stirred something deep, the weight of endurance, the power of recognition, then you grasp why these stories must be told. The past is never finished. Neither are we.